review of the separate but equal ruling and the erosion of the Plessy ruling. In 1939, the NAACP would assist Marian Anderson, a leading American classical singer, by launching a publicity campaign to highlight the Daughters of the American Revolution's refusal to allow Mrs. Anderson to perform at Constitution Hall simply because Mrs. Anderson was a woman of color. After a suggestion from the NAACP's Walter White of staging the concert at the Lincoln Memorial, arrangements were made and Mrs. Anderson performed on Easter Sunday on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. In October of 1939, the NAACP formed its Legal Defense and Educational Fund. The goal of the organization was to secure equal justice under the law for all individuals. In 1947, President Harry Truman addressed the NAACP, promising that federal government would act to end discrimination, violence, and race prejudice in America. After years of inequalities for African Americans in the federal government and in the military, in 1948, actions of the NAACP pressured President Truman into signing an executive order mandating non-discrimination in federal employment and equality of treatment and opportunity in the armed forces. By 1950, the NAACP had begun its campaign to further erode the legal doctrine established by the United States Supreme Court in Plessy v. Ferguson that separate but equal schools for black and white children was constitutional. The NAACP set out to prove that separate facilities provided to black students were not equal to those for whites. In the Supreme Court case of Heman Marion Sweat, the court ruled that the separate law school the state of Texas had established for African Americans was not equal to the University of Texas. The ultimate blow to the Plessy decision came on May 17, 1954, when the Supreme Court declared in the Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas case that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Chief Justice Earl Warren delivered the unanimous ruling. We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Most states accepted the ruling and began to desegregate, but others, notably in the Deep South, refused to accept the court's decision. Acts in defiance of segregation continued when on December 1, 1955, NAACP member Rosa Parks was arrested and fined for violating a city ordinance by refusing to give up her seat to a white man on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. Mrs. Parks' noble actions sparked the beginning of the civil rights movement. Following Parks' arrest, a local Baptist pastor, Martin Luther King Jr., helped to organize protests against bus segregation. Challenging the Montgomery Ordinance, the NAACP pursued the case to the U.S. Supreme Court, where the Montgomery Ordinance, under which Mrs. Parks had been fined, was ruled unconstitutional. This decision outlawed racial segregation on public transportation. In Little Rock, Arkansas, in 1957, 9 African American students, with the aid of the local NAACP president, Mrs. Daisy Bates, were enrolled in Little Rock Central High School. The governor of Arkansas deployed the state's National Guard to stop the students from entering the school building. After 18 days of attempting to persuade the governor to obey the Supreme Court ruling, President Dwight Eisenhower sent in federal troops to ensure the students could attend the school. The civil rights movement would continue in the 60s with sit-ins that included members of the NAACP's Youth Council at whites-only lunch counters and other segregated public establishments to protest the policies of segregation in the services provided to African Americans. The NAACP helped to plan and coordinate a political rally in 1963 where black and white leaders descended on Washington, D.C. for the historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, a cry to Congress to pass civil rights legislation. This is where Dr. Martin Luther King shared his dream from the steps of the Lincoln Monument in his famous speech, whose message resonates throughout time.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed.
A historic goal of the NAACP would be significantly reached with the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. On July 2, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed the act into law, a law that banned racial segregation in schools, public places, and employment. The law also gave certain protections to women's rights and gave a process of redress to employment discrimination with the creation of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. In the years that followed, the NAACP took an aggressive role in voter registration drives across the country and continued to fight through the legal system against persistent acts of segregation and discrimination. Today, the NAACP is governed nationally by a 64-member board of directors. The headquarters are in Baltimore, Maryland, with regional offices located in California, New York, Michigan, Missouri, Georgia, and Texas. As of 2004, the NAACP had approximately 500,000 members.
I've had the honor to serve as a former president of the Prince William County branch of the NAACP. Not quite 100 years, but at least dating back to the 20s, we have made significant differences, including the integration of the public schools, the working towards the diversity of a more diverse workforce, looking at our judicial system in Prince William County, the increased diversity that we see in county government, the establishment of the Prince William County Human Rights Commission, that enforces human and civil rights in EEO cases.
The NAACP continues its mission to ensure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of the rights of all persons and to eliminate racial hatred and racial discrimination. But history will always remember the pioneers of the organization: W.E.B. Du Bois, Mary White Overton, James Wendell Johnson, Dr. Joel E. Spingard, Maury Field Story, Oswald Garrison Villard, Ida Wells Bennett, Charles Houston Hamilton, Thurgood Marshall, Roy Wilkins, and Medgar Evers. From slavery to the presidency, wouldn't these brave individuals who dedicated their lives to obtain equality and basic civil liberties be pleased at where we are today in the quest for black citizenship in America? We have Carter G. Woodson to thank for starting the annual celebration of Black History. Mr. Woodson, who is known as the father of Black History Month, believed that all Americans should know the significant contributions that African Americans have made to the history of this country. This is because Black history touches everyone's history, and it influences everyone's future. To learn more about the NAACP or other organizations that aided in the quest for black citizenship in America, or other points of interest in black history, please visit your local library. On behalf of the Prince William County Black History Committee, I'm Bernadette Peel.
I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
Congratulations, Mr. President.
I stand here today as hopeful as ever. Thank you. God bless you.